The golden eyes that held a family secret. I never thought I'd be claiming an inheritance worth millions of dollars at 60 years old. And I certainly never imagined that this inheritance would lead me to discover a truth that would turn everything I knew about my family upside down. It all started with a phone call from Attorney Thompson on a rainy October day. My great-aunt Eleanor had passed away, and I needed to come in for the reading of her will. Eleanor was a wealthy eccentric who had lived alone in a massive 19th century mansion on the outskirts of our small Vermont town. We rarely saw each other except at family funerals, so I honestly didn't expect her to remember me in her will. But the real shock awaited me at Thompson's office. Sitting at the long conference table was an unfamiliar man in his late 50s with graying hair and golden eyes. Exactly the same as mine, as my 35-year-old daughter Sarah's, and as my 16-year-old granddaughter Emma's. Our family's golden eyes were legendary. These unusual amber gold eyes with green flecks had been passed down through the Morgan family for over a century, but not to every descendant. Not just light brown or yellow, truly golden like molten metal. In sunlight, they literally glowed, and under artificial lighting, they took on a copper tint. People would stop on the street to stare at these eyes. Photographers begged us to pose. In pictures, our eyes looked impossibly beautiful. My grandfather, Robert, born in 1920, used to say that the first Morgan with such eyes appeared in our family in the 1850s, after his great-great-grandfather married a Roma girl from Eastern Europe. Since then, this trait had been passed down only through the direct line, but very selectively, as if nature carefully chose who would receive this rare gift. Grandfather had 5 children, but only my father inherited the golden eyes. His brothers and sisters were born with ordinary brown or green eyes. My father often joked that he was the sole heir to the family gold, never suspecting how literally true those words would prove to be. As a child, I thought we were special, that our golden eyes gave us some kind of superpowers, and indeed, all the carriers of these eyes in our family had been extraordinarily successful in life. Grandfather built a thriving business. My father became a renowned architect. I made my career in real estate. Even Sarah, despite an early divorce, successfully runs her own design studio. But seeing those same eyes on a complete stranger in a law office was like being struck by lightning. My heart skipped a beat. Emma instinctively grabbed my hand, while Sarah turned so pale I worried she might faint. This was impossible. Our golden eyes were our unique feature, our pride. How could this stranger have them? The attorney began reading Great-Aunt Eleanor's will. She was leaving her mansion, valued at $1,800,000, and the rest of her assets totaling $6 million, with one condition. The inheritance goes only to adult blood relatives of the Morgan family with golden eyes. If there are several such people, they divide it equally. If none are found, everything goes to a children's home. I exchanged bewildered glances with Sarah. What a strange condition. And what did this stranger have to do with it? Then the stranger raised his hand and introduced himself as James Harrison. He claimed to be the son of Robert Morgan, my grandfather. The world tilted around me. Grandfather had been a model family man who never cheated on Grandma Dorothy, raised 5 children, and was a pillar of respectability for the entire town. What son could he be talking about? And if this was true, then this man was my uncle, even though he was only a year younger than me. Sarah was outraged. How did this man even learn about the will? Why was he claiming our family inheritance? Emma stared silently at the stranger, clearly amazed by the similarity of their golden eyes. Mr. Thompson explained that James had contacted his firm immediately after Eleanor's obituary was published. When the attorney saw his golden eyes and heard his story, he decided to include him in the will reading. James calmly took out an old photograph and placed it on the table. It showed a man who looked strikingly like my grandfather, embracing a young woman with dark hair. The man had those same golden eyes. Even in the black and white photo, their uniqueness was obvious from their shape and expression. He explained that this was a photograph of his parents, Robert Morgan and Rose Harrison, taken in 1964. I stared intently at the picture. The resemblance was indeed striking, but I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. This would shatter everything I knew about grandfather. Mr. Thompson gave us a week so that all parties could provide proof of their claims. If James truly turned out to be Robert Morgan's son with golden eyes, he would have equal rights to the inheritance with us. We left in complete bewilderment. I couldn't speak a word during the drive home. If this man was telling the truth, then everything I believed about my family was a lie. Sarah, Emma, and I went to grandfather's old house, which had been empty since my mother's death. We needed to find any evidence. In grandfather's study, we searched through all the documents. At first, nothing suspicious. Ordinary business papers, contracts, tax returns. But in a secret drawer of the old desk, we found a folder marked personal. Inside were bank documents that took my breath away. From 1965 to 1985, grandfather had sent $500 every month to Columbus, Ohio. Recipient, Rose Harrison. Purpose, child support. $500 a month in the 1960s was huge money. Over 20 years, that added up to $120,000, enough to buy several houses back then. But the most shocking discovery was a box of photographs hidden in the basement. Dozens of pictures of a young woman with a child. The woman looked exactly like the one in James' photograph. And the boy had our golden eyes. On the back of one photograph, in grandfather's handwriting, was written, James, age 3, eyes like all the chosen Morgans. I sat on the dusty basement floor and wept. Not just cried, sobbed like a child who had been betrayed by the closest people. Sarah hugged me, and I felt her tears dripping onto my hair. Emma stood nearby with wide-open eyes, holding a photograph of an unfamiliar boy who was her great-uncle. Grandfather hadn't just cheated on Grandma. He had hidden an entire family from us, a son with our family eyes, whom he loved and cared for, but whom we never knew. How many years had he lived with this secret? How had he managed to sit at the family table every Sunday, smile at us, and tell stories while hiding the existence of another child? The next day, I met with James at a cafe. Up close, the resemblance to grandfather was even more striking. The same facial features, the same walk, even the same way of speaking. But most striking were his eyes. They weren't just golden. They glowed exactly the same way grandfather's eyes had glowed when he was happy or excited. James told his story without emotion, like someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. His mother, Rose, had worked as a secretary at grandfather's construction firm since 1963. A romance developed between them. When she became pregnant in 1964, grandfather offered her money to move away and supported her and the child until 1985. Rose agreed, not wanting to destroy another family. By then, grandfather already had 4 children with his wife, and a 5th child could have ruined not only the marriage, but his reputation. James only learned the truth before his mother's death, 3 years ago. She left him a box of letters from his father. In the letters, grandfather wrote about his son with such tenderness that I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a mixture of jealousy, grief, and understanding. One letter from 1978 particularly struck me. James is 13 and becoming a real man. Rose sent a photograph. He has our family eyes, and they shine just like my grandfather's did. Sometimes I think the soul of our lineage is contained in those eyes. How I would love to hug my son and tell him the history of our family. Reading these lines, I couldn't hold back tears. Grandfather had dreamed of embracing his son, telling him about the family, just as he had embraced me as a child and told me those same stories. But James grew up without those embraces, without family Sunday dinners, without grandfather's bedtime stories. But the most captivating discovery lay ahead. We did a DNA test, which confirmed our relationship. James was indeed my uncle, my grandfather's son. Then I went to visit him in Ohio to meet his family, and then something incredible happened. James had a 30-year-old son, Michael, and 2 grandchildren, 5-year-old Aiden and 7-year-old Zoe. When I first saw these children, I was breathless. Both had our golden eyes, but not just golden. They glowed with some special inner fire. How surprising, since golden eyes are passed down so rarely. Of grandfather's 5 children, only my father inherited them, and now Michael turned out to be their carrier too. Linda, James's wife, told me something amazing. Little Aiden and Zoe had shown strange abilities from early childhood. They could unerringly sense people's moods, could predict when someone would get upset or fall ill. At daycare, the teachers said children were drawn to them, as if they sensed something special about them. But most astonishing, they had dreams about places they'd never been. Aiden often told of dreams about green hills and maples, though he'd lived his whole life in flat Ohio. And Zoe drew stone walls and old houses, exactly like the ones we have in Vermont. I remembered my own childhood. I too had such dreams about people and places I didn't know. I dreamed of a woman in an old-fashioned dress with golden eyes who stood by a lake and sang strange songs. Growing up, I decided it was just imagination. But now I wondered, what if these were ancestral memories? Sarah admitted she'd had similar dreams as a child, and Emma had recently told me about a recurring dream where she dances with Roma around a fire. Could our golden eyes be more than just a beautiful feature? Could ancestral memory be passed through them? I decided to study our family history more deeply. In the City Library archives, I found amazing documents. In 1854, my great-great-great-grandfather, Thomas Morgan, had indeed married a young Roma woman named Zoltana. Church records noted that she had eyes the color of molten gold, unusually beautiful and piercing. But the most interesting discovery was in old newspaper clippings. In the 1890s, the local paper wrote about the golden-eyed Morgans as a family that possesses an amazing ability to foresee business matters and always ends up in the right place at the right time. It was noted that not all descendants possessed such abilities. Only those rare, fortunate ones who inherited the ancestress's golden eyes. In the 1920s, Thomas and Zoltana's grandson, my great-grandfather, became famous for predicting the stock market crash and pulling his money out of stocks a month before the 1929 collapse. Newspapers called him the man with golden eyes and golden instinct. Interestingly, my great-grandfather had 6 children, but only 2 inherited golden eyes, my grandfather Robert and his sister, who died young. And my grandfather Robert started his construction business in the most unsuitable place, on swampy town outskirts. Everyone laughed at his choice, but 10 years later, they built a new highway right there, and his land increased in value 100-fold. Did we really possess some special gift? And was this gift passed only through golden eyes to chosen descendants? When I shared my discoveries with James, he told me even more amazing things. His mother, Rose, had kept a diary, and it contained entries about grandfather sometimes entering a strange state. His golden eyes would begin to glow brighter than usual, and he would say things that came true months or years later. Rose wrote, "Today Robert's eyes burned like 2 suns. He said he would get a contract to build a school in 3 months." I laughed. Nobody's planning to build a school. But exactly 3 months later, City Hall announced a tender for building a new school, and Robert got the contract. In another entry, Robert woke up in the middle of the night with glowing eyes and said we needed to sell the lot on Main Street. In the morning, a buyer came with a very profitable offer. How could he have known? I began remembering my own life from a new angle. How many times had I made decisions that seemed crazy but proved right? How many times had I bought real estate in unpromising neighborhoods that later became prestigious? How many times had I avoided deals that later turned into scandals for others? And always, when I made these intuitive decisions, my eyes would begin to tingle strangely, as if they had their own inner light. Sarah admitted she experienced the same thing. When creating design projects, sometimes she sees the finished result as a bright flash before her eyes, and these projects always become the most successful. And Emma told me she can sense which people will bring trouble just by looking at them. Her eyes begin to burn, and she instinctively avoids such people. Now I understood why Great-Aunt Eleanor had put such a strange condition in her will. She too knew about our abilities. Moreover, she knew about James's existence and wanted to reunite the family. In her papers, we found an amazing document, the Morgan family genealogical tree, where James was listed as a hidden branch. Next to his name was a note, "Gift carrier. Must return to family to preserve the lineage's strength." Eleanor had studied our family history her entire life. She knew that golden eyes weren't just an external feature, but a marker of people with special abilities. And she understood that these abilities weaken if gene carriers don't maintain connection with each other. After studying Eleanor's archive, we learned even more amazing details about our family. Eleanor was born in 1935, 15 years after grandfather Robert. She was the youngest in the family and the only one who didn't inherit golden eyes. Perhaps that's why she so carefully studied those who possessed them. In her diaries, we found entries dating to the 1950s, when she was only 15. Robert guessed which stocks would rise again. Mom says he's lucky, but I see how his eyes light up when he makes decisions. It's not luck, it's something else. Eleanor became a historian and worked at a museum her whole life. But her true passion was studying the family genealogy. She corresponded with historians in Europe, searching for traces of the Roma caravan to which Sultana had belonged. In the 1970s, she even traveled to Romania and Hungary, trying to find records about our mysterious ancestress. From her notes, we learned amazing details about Zoltana. Her real name was Zlatka Kovac, and she belonged to an ancient line of nomadic Roma who were famous for their seers. In Roma culture, people with golden eyes were considered special. They said such people could glimpse the future and feel hidden currents of fate. Eleanor found documents showing that Zlatka's caravan had come to America in 1853. The Roma performed in New England towns, and it was at one such performance that Thomas Morgan first saw the girl with golden eyes. He was struck by her beauty, but even more impressed that she predicted his upcoming profit from a deal he had told no one about. In Thomas's letters to his brother, which Eleanor discovered in archives, he wrote, "The Roma girl looked at me with her incredible eyes and predicted I would soon profit from a deal I hadn't told anyone about." When everything came true exactly a week later, I understood. This girl possesses an astonishing gift. According to family legends recorded by Eleanor from old-timers' accounts, Zlatka possessed remarkable intuition. She could predict weather, livestock diseases, harvests. Local farmers came to her for advice, and her predictions almost always came true. But she never called it magic. She said she simply listened to ancestral voices through golden eyes. Eleanor's records about how the gift was passed through generations were particularly interesting. She traced the genealogy and discovered a pattern. Golden eyes appeared in about 1 out of every 4 or 5 children, and always in those who later showed unusual abilities. Thomas and Zlatka's son, my great-great-grandfather William, became a successful merchant. His diaries, carefully preserved by Eleanor, contain entries about golden visions, moments when he suddenly understood which goods would be in demand, or sensed price changes coming. His son, my great-grandfather Edward, was the man who predicted the 1929 stock market crash. Eleanor found his correspondence with a banker, where he wrote, "Every time I look at market reports, my eyes begin to hurt, as if warning of danger. This stock growth is unnatural, and everything will soon collapse." Grandfather Robert was the next carrier of the gift. Eleanor recorded his predictions from childhood. In the 1940s, he predicted where new roads would be built and bought land there. In the 1950s, he guessed which city districts would develop. In the 1960s, he foresaw the construction boom and expanded his company just in time. But the most amazing discovery awaited us in Eleanor's personal records. It turned out she had known about Rose and James from the very beginning. In 1965, when James was born, Grandfather had confided in his younger sister. He was desperate, didn't know what to do, felt torn between 2 families. Eleanor recorded their conversations. In one entry from 1966, she wrote, "Robert told me about the boy. The child has golden eyes, the same as ours. Robert wept, said he couldn't acknowledge his son, but couldn't renounce him either. I told him that someday the truth would surface anyway, and our family should be ready to accept the boy." She regularly received photographs of James from Grandfather and followed his development. When the boy turned 7, Eleanor recorded, "Rose writes that James is an unusual child. He senses when people are sad and knows how to comfort them. Children at school are drawn to him. The teacher says he has special intuition. the gift is manifesting. For decades, Eleanor led a double life. Outwardly, she was a quiet, unmarried woman who worked at a museum and lived alone. But secretly, she corresponded with Rose, sent money for James's education, and followed his successes. When James entered university, it was Eleanor who paid for his education, though he didn't know it. In 1985, when grandfather stopped sending support after James became financially independent, Eleanor took over this assistance. She helped James start his career, bought a house for his family, and paid for the grandchildren's education. All this was done through intermediaries and charitable foundations, so James thought he was just lucky. Eleanor's records about James's grandchildren were especially touching. When Michael was born, she wrote, "The boy has grandfather's golden eyes." Rose sent a photograph. He's an exact copy of Robert as a child. The gift didn't disappear, it passed on. And when Aiden and Zoe were born, she noted, 2 golden-eyed children in one generation. This happens extremely rarely. Perhaps the lineage's strength is being restored. Eleanor carefully studied the manifestations of abilities in each golden-eyed carrier. In her records are interesting observations. The golden-eyed Morgans possess an amazing ability to sense hidden currents of life. Robert always knew when something would change. This might be specially developed intuition, or it might be something greater that we don't yet understand. She also noted that abilities manifested differently in different carriers. Grandfather had a talent for business and real estate. My father had architectural intuition, the ability to predict which buildings would be in demand. I have investment intuition. Sarah has design foresight for trends. After all these discoveries, we realized there were 4 golden-eyed heirs over 18, me, Sarah, James, and his son Michael. Emma hadn't yet reached adulthood, so according to the will's conditions, she couldn't claim the inheritance. We divided the $7,800,000 equally. Each received $1,950,000. We kept the $1,800,000 mansion in joint ownership as a family meeting place. But most importantly, we decided to continue Eleanor's work, studying our family with our whole team of golden-eyed relatives. After studying Eleanor's archive, we decided to continue her work. But now as an entire family, the mansion became not just a meeting place, but a kind of research base. We keep detailed records of ability manifestations, try to find patterns, and study family history. Michael proved especially useful in these investigations. His veterinary education helped us understand that the intuitive connection with animals he possesses might have a completely scientific explanation. Animals communicate mainly through body language and pheromones. Perhaps the golden-eyed Morgans simply pick up these subtle signals better than others. The children also contributed to our understanding of the family gift. Despite being only 5, Aiden shows amazing mathematical abilities and sees patterns where others don't notice them. Zoe draws portraits with astonishing accuracy, remembering the tiniest details of faces and expressions. Emma began keeping a diary of her unusual dreams. Many of them come true with surprising accuracy, as if she really glimpses the future. Gradually, we came to understand that the family gift is something amazing and mysterious that connects us across generations. Perhaps it's truly a special kind of intuition, or perhaps something greater that we don't yet understand. We began conducting family training sessions. When we gather together, we practice concentrating, sharing observations, and analyzing situations from different perspectives. It turns out that when all the golden-eyed work together, our collective intuition becomes much stronger. The mansion became our true family center. We completely renovated the building, turning it into a place where everyone feels at home. In Eleanor's former study, we organized a library of family history. In the large living room, we hold family councils and discussions. The children's rooms are set up so that little golden-eyed ones can develop their abilities. The garden around the mansion was also transformed. Michael, with his love of nature, created an amazing place there. A combination of ornamental plants and a small farm where children can observe animals and plants, developing their powers of observation. We established a tradition of gathering as a whole family every weekend. These meetings became not just family dinners for us, but real research sessions. We discuss our observations, share insights, and help each other solve problems. Linda, James's wife, although she doesn't possess golden eyes, became an integral part of our family. Her teaching experience proved invaluable in working with children. She helps us understand how to better develop the children's abilities without suppressing their natural development. It's especially interesting to observe how the young gift carriers interact with each other. Despite their age difference, Aiden and Zoe understand each other almost without words. They play games that seem ordinary, but actually develop their observation skills and intuition. For example, they love playing Guess the Mood. One of them expresses an emotion and the other has to identify it. But they pick up not only obvious signs, but also the slightest changes in posture, breathing, and eye expression. To adults, it seems like they're reading minds, but in reality, they're just incredibly attentive to details. Emma became something like a mentor for the younger children. At 16, she already understands the nature of the family gift quite well and knows how to explain to the little ones how to use their abilities. She teaches them to observe people, remember details, and analyze situations. Recently, something happened that once again confirmed our theory about the nature of the family gift. An elderly woman with dementia went missing in town. Police had been searching for her unsuccessfully for 2 days. Emma, hearing the situation description, suddenly said the woman had most likely gone to the old church on the outskirts, where there used to be a kindergarten she had once attended. At first glance, this was just a guess, but Emma explained her logic. She had noticed that the missing woman always wore an old-fashioned angel brooch. Such brooches were popular in the 1940s. This meant the woman was religious and valued traditions. With dementia, people often return to childhood memories. The description said she was wearing house slippers, meaning she left spontaneously. Not planning a long walk, the church was close enough to reach in slippers, but far enough to get lost. They indeed found the woman near the old church. The police officers were amazed by the accuracy of the prediction. But we understood. This wasn't a mystical gift, but brilliant analysis of details that others simply hadn't noticed. This case strengthened our confidence that the family gift can and should be used for good. We began discussing possibilities for applying our unusual abilities to help people. And you know what? Since we've been reunited, our abilities really have become stronger. Emma began having prophetic dreams with astonishing accuracy. Sarah creates designs that become trends years later. And at 60, I've suddenly started making investments with an accuracy that surprises even me. Little Aiden and Zoe are developing incredibly. At 5, Aiden solves math problems that 10-year-olds can handle. And Zoe draws portraits of people she's seen only once, conveying every emotion with remarkable precision. But most importantly, we feel connected to each other. When all the golden-eyed gather together, it's as if special energy appears in the air. We understand each other almost without words, sense emotions and thoughts, and support each other in difficult moments. James told me recently that he'd felt empty his whole life, as if something was missing. Only when we met did this emptiness disappear. He felt like part of something bigger, a lineage that's over a century and a half old and possesses a rare heritage. It's especially interesting to observe how the gift manifests in different generations. In children, it seems purer and stronger, perhaps because they haven't yet cluttered their minds with adult doubts. And in us, the older generation, the abilities are more subtle, but we know how to control them better. Michael, the only one of grandfather's grandchildren, besides me and Sarah, to inherit golden eyes, told me something amazing. He'd felt a special connection with animals his whole life. No wonder he became a veterinarian. Animals trust him instinctively, and he often understands what's bothering them, even before examination. Perhaps someday scientists will be able to explain the connection between unusual eye pigmentation and special abilities. For now, we simply accept this gift as part of Zlatka's amazing legacy, who over a century and a half ago brought to our family not only golden eyes, but mysterious abilities whose nature we're only beginning to understand. And the golden eyes continue to burn in new generations, passed to only chosen descendants, connecting us with invisible threads across time and distances, reminding us that family is not only blood ties, but also a shared heritage that makes us stronger together. And every time I look in the mirror at my golden eyes, I think about Great Aunt Eleanor, who managed to reunite our family, and about Grandfather, whose secret ultimately didn't destroy us, but made us stronger. But sometimes, especially when we all gather together at the mansion, I can't shake the thought, what if there's someone else out there with golden eyes? Another hidden branch of our family tree that we don't know about yet. After all, if Grandfather could hide James for half a century, who knows what other secrets our family history holds? Maybe somewhere a woman with golden eyes lives, never suspecting her kinship with us, or a man who's considered himself an orphan his whole life, not knowing he has a large family. Every time we study family documents, I look for clues, unfamiliar names in correspondence, unknown addresses, unaccounted money transfers. And until we find answers to all our questions, our story won't be complete. Perhaps some secrets exist only to bring us closer together across time, generations, and golden eyes that never stop glowing.